Fight for fair pay. The debate over minimum wage is hitting every industry. As of July, 14 states, plus the District of Columbia, raised minimum wage to above $10. But unlike some had predicted, job losses and price hikes to compensate for the uptake haven't happened yet. Yahoo Finance's Kristin Myers joins us now, and that's not the only finding. The states that didn't raise are suffering some job losses.
Yeah, so what we are finding, we always heard, right, with that fight for 15, right, that was coming out a couple years ago, Bernie Sanders obviously famously leading the charge for that. A lot of economists came out and they said, listen, if you hike that minimum wage to $15 an hour, you are not only going to see job losses in all of the states and in all of the areas that do that, you're also going to see these businesses pass along those prices to consumers. And frankly, that just has not borne out in the data. And there's actually a couple of studies that have come out to prove that. So there was a recent report, Axios actually did an analysis using Bureau of Labor Statistics data, checking job growth in a bunch of different states. And they actually found that, look, actually in states that actually hiked the minimum wage, they are experiencing job growth. States that don't necessarily raise that minimum wage, to your point, they're not necessarily doing as well. You would think that the job growth there would be increasing more than in the states that raise those minimum wages. That's actually not true.
So the question is then, where is that money? It has to give somewhere, right? So if you as an employer are paying more to employees, one of a number of things is happening, right? You're hiring less people, fewer people, or your margins are smaller, or you're growing enough that you have room to make up for it. Do we know which of these things? It sounds like the first option's not happening. You're not necessarily hiring fewer people.
Right.
Although anecdotally, I think we all know examples where perhaps that's happening, but not on a large scale. So which of the other two things is happening?
So I think there's definitely those stories, right, that you hear all the time. You do hear some businesses saying, look, I can't hire as many people, or I've had to cut hours for some of my workers. That absolutely does exist. But right now we're in an economy that is a very tight labor market. Right now there's just not enough people out there for some of these jobs. And so employers are having to go out there regardless to pay more money to some of these folks. And so they're finding, you know what? Hiking the minimum wage, we're paying more money, we're able to get more workers inside the door. But here's the thing, when it comes to that long-term picture, it's still a little bit unclear as to what's going to be happening. So which one of those specific answers? I don't think that there's a very clear answer on that as yet right now.
Yeah, it's kind of a mixed bag, I think, Kristin. I mean, you are seeing, revenue growth make up for it. I think you're seeing squeezed margins. It sort of depends on the business. But it's really interesting. I mean, to my mind, this is this trope you hear from economists with a certain political orientation. Oh, it's going to kill job growth. And it's just not the case. And they haven't raised the minimum wage. This is the longest period that they haven't raised the minimum wage. And by the way, the states that haven't raised the minimum wage, which is to say they hew to the national standard, are red states. And, and they're slow growth red states, by the way. There are a lot in the southern part of the United States. And, those states are falling behind. And the economies where they're raising the minimum wage happen to be faster growth states. Then you can understand why, because then there's more pressure in the labor market there. So it sort of makes sense.
So it's really interesting.
If you ask me.
Well, it's really interesting because every time I feel like I've talked about this topic before, people have said, listen, the United States obviously is comprised of many different states, each of which has their own different economies. Some states are growing faster than others. You cannot apply a minimum wage as like a one-size-fits-all standard for all of the states in the United States. But there was a really interesting study that came out a couple of months ago out of Berkeley that actually decided to examine those lower wage states and those rural areas to see, hey, if we did hike the minimum wage to $15 an hour, are those states going to suffer the way that a lot of critics said that they would? And the answer is no, that they actually won't suffer. They actually can afford to raise the minimum wage to $15 as the floor.
$7.25 an hour is not a lot of money.
Not enough.
You get the last word.
Hey investors, Zach Guzman here. Are you interested in learning more about the markets and getting the latest financial news? Well, then click right here to subscribe to our Yahoo Finance YouTube channel. Get the latest up-to-the-minute market analysis, big interviews in the world of finance, and information on how to manage your money every day wherever you are.